Perfect, starting time. Mulan is a Disney movie in which we see a woman who fights battles for her father. She doesn't want her father to go to war, so she disguises herself as a man and hides herself. And she fights for her country and she saves all of China. But she's a woman. And nobody respects her until the emperor does. And this leads me to the quotation of today of freeing yourself was one thing, claiming ownership of that freed self was another. And I believe that Toni Morrison is trying to say that exception is key. And we can agree with this because we need to know who we are. We can look at this through two different arguments. We need to know ourselves before we can help others, and we have to accept who we are. Looking at how we have to know ourselves before we can help others, I have two examples. We can first look at the feedback loop from hell, and second, backwards law. The feedback loop from hell is presented by Mark Manson and his group in his book, The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck. And this is because he is talking about how we are circling and we keep generating more anxiety or more anger because we're anxious about something and then we get more anxious about it and then we get more anxiety because of that. And he describes this as this a negative feeling, and until we can understand this feeling and come to a solution, we can't help anyone around us. And that leads me to the second example of the backwards law. The backwards law was introduced by Alan Watts, and it refers to how the more you pursue feeling better all the time, the less satisfied you actually become, because the more you pursue something only reinforces the fact that you lack it in the first place. So both the feedback loop from hell and the backwards law show that we can't help others until we really help ourselves first. So now looking at the second part of this, we have to accept who we are. And we have to accept who we are because we have to understand and know ourselves to help others. And we can look at this through Mamma Mia and Inside Out 2. First, looking at Mamma Mia. Mamma Mia is a 2-movie series in which it follows the story of a girl who didn't know who her father was. And in the first movie, she figures out and she goes under all of this stress trying to figure out who her father is. And in the end, she doesn't matter. She has 3 wonderful fathers. She doesn't care which one is actually her father. And she decides not to marry the love of her life, but instead go and explore the world and figure out who she is as a person. And she accepts the fact that she may not have a father, and that's okay. And then looking at Inside Out or Inside Out 2 that's recently coming up, we can look at Riley's perspective as a child who doesn't understand the world that's happening around her. Her parents moved her across the country. She doesn't have any friends. She wants to move back home. She has no idea what's happening or why. And she gets these new feelings. And we saw through the Inside Out 2 trailer that anxiety is an amazing feeling that's going to come up at some point. So we can see that in Inside Out and how she has to accept who she is. In the end of the first movie, she has to accept that this is happening to her and that's okay. And then she goes home and she cries with her parents and says she's sorry because she understands that life happens sometimes and she has to accept the feelings that she has. And Joy sees this when she allows sadness to take over because Riley has to accept all of her feelings. So going back to the quotation today of freeing yourself was one thing, claiming ownership of that freed self was another. Toni Morrison was saying that exception is key. And we can agree with this because we need to know ourselves. And we can argue this by saying that we can't help others until we know ourselves by looking at the feedback loop from hell and the backwards law. And we have to accept who we are by looking at Inside Out and Inside Out 2 and Mamma Mia. So going all the way back to Mulan, Mulan is a story of a person, a woman who just had to accept who she was. She was a fighter. We saw this in the second movie when Mulan decided that, yes, she is a fighter and she will fight for what is right. And then she ends up marrying the love of her life, Shang, because she knows who she is as a person and she accepts that and she makes that who she is.